Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. I'm excited for today because we're diving deep into Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2. And you want to learn more about suckling, right?
That's right.
Yeah, it's honestly a topic that I was curious about too, so let's figure it out together.
Okay, well, I think people might be surprised when they first hear about it, but it really is a fascinating concept. This simple act can end up having really profound impacts on Islamic law and social structures.
Exactly. It's like more than just breastfeeding. It's
Yeah.
almost like it creates a foster relationship of some sort.
It does. So in Islamic law, when a child is breastfed, especially when they're really young, it forms a connection that goes beyond just the biological mom and child. And this bond from breastfeeding creates a foster relationship. It's actually treated like a blood tie.
Oh, wow. Okay, so are you saying that like the rules about siblings and parents, those also apply to people who are connected through suckling?
Yeah, it does.
That's a big deal socially.
It is. And Sunan al Tirmidhi actually explains this really well. There's a hadith, number 1147, that says, and I'm paraphrasing here, whatever Allah has forbidden through birth, he's also forbidden through suckling.
Wow, hold on. So that means marriage, inheritance, even just touching. Those are all forbidden between people linked through suckling.
Yeah, it
This
is.
is way more important than I thought it would be.
It is, and it just shows how important breastfeeding is in Islam. It's not just about, giving the baby food. It's about the entire social structure. It determines who you can and can't interact with. And even family relationships go beyond, like, just who you're related to by blood.
Wow, so this isn't some abstract idea. It actually affects people's lives. It literally determines who you can marry, who you get inheritance from, who you can even be alone with.
Exactly. And the text gives, like, specific guidelines on how to deal with all this. For example, Hadith 1152 points out a really important detail. It says that the suckling only counts if it happens before the kid turns 2.
Oh, okay.
Ah.
Is that because after 2 years old, the child doesn't really need breastfeeding for like their core development?
That could be one way of looking at it. A lot of Islamic scholars think that for suckling to create this special bond, it needs to really impact the child's development. After 2, breastfeeding is more for comfort and maybe some extra nutrition, but it doesn't really establish that same kind of foster relationship
Maybe.
with all the rules that come with it.
So it's all about like those super early years of breastfeeding when it really shapes who they become. It's kind of amazing how a small detail like that can have such big consequences, legally and socially. It's like a ripple effect.
Yeah, it really is. And being so specific makes things much more clear and just, it gives Muslims a roadmap for dealing with some tough situations. Think about it. What if there are 2 families and they don't even realize that there was a past breastfeeding relationship between their kids? These rules help prevent them from accidentally breaking Islamic law.
Right, that's true. So it's about setting boundaries and making sure people don't cross those boundaries, even if it happened generations ago.
Exactly. But even with all these serious rules, there are some really heartwarming stories too. For example, Hadith 1153 talks about how kind the Prophet was to the woman who breastfed him when he was little.
Well, that's nice. It shows that even with all the rules and what's forbidden, there's still a deep respect and thanks for those who took care of you.
Yeah, that's right. It shows that these rules aren't just some abstract ideas. They're all about building a society where we treat each other with compassion, especially those who cared for us when we were most vulnerable.
Yeah, it reminds you that family in Islam goes way beyond who you're related to by blood. It's about recognizing and appreciating those who took care of you, even if they're not your biological family.
You got it. And this brings us to Hadith 1148, which actually surprised me a bit the first time I read it. It talks about the Prophet telling a man that he shouldn't be alone with a woman he suckled as a baby.
Oh, wow. Are you serious?
Uh,
I don't even know what to say. It means that even though there's no blood relation, the rules about that suckling bond are just as strict.
It is. And this Hadith is showing us how seriously we need to take these foster relationships made through suckling. It's like a big flashing sign saying that the same rules we have for blood relatives apply here too, even if there's no actual family connection.
So you're saying that even something as simple as being alone with someone becomes forbidden if there was this suckling bond between them. It really shows how much weight this whole concept has in Islam.
It really does. It reminds us that family in Islam isn't just about biology. It's about all these different connections we make throughout our lives, connections that shape who we are and how we interact with each other. And sometimes those connections come from the most unexpected places, like breastfeeding.
So we've talked about how suckling creates this special foster relationship and has all these rules attached to it. But what about situations that are even more complex? Like what about rules for freed slaves?
Things definitely get more complicated then. Hadith 1154 deals with a very specific situation. A freed slave woman who has a husband.
And
Well, there are different rulings depending on who the husband is. If the husband was also a slave, then once the woman was freed, she had the right to choose whether to stay with him or not. But if her husband was already a free man, then she didn't get to choose.
that seems like a really important difference. Why is there a difference in those two situations?
Well, it all goes back to how sensitive Islamic law is to power dynamics and people's individual situations.
Yeah.
Remember, back then, slavery was a part of life. So when both the husband and wife were slaves and they were both set free, it was like entering a whole new world for both of them. Giving the woman the choice to stay or go recognized that their whole relationship might change because of their newfound freedom.
Okay, that makes sense. Everything's changing for them, so it's only right to let her decide if she wants to stay in the marriage. But why didn't the woman get to choose if her husband was already free?
Well, in that case, the husband was already in a much higher social position. The ruling is probably there to make sure that the woman isn't pressured or forced into staying in the marriage. Islamic law recognized that the power dynamic wasn't equal in those cases. This ruling was a way to protect the woman.
So Islamic law is all about making sure things are fair and just, taking into account everyone's situation.
Precisely. It reminds us that Islamic rulings aren't just about strictly applying rules to every situation. They're about trying to be fair and just, considering what's happening in the world and in people's lives.
This really makes me realize that you can't just read a rule and apply it blindly. Everything depends on the context and the specific people involved.
Exactly. It's a big reminder that you need to really study and understand Islamic law. It's
Okay.
not about memorizing rules. It's about understanding the bigger ideas behind those rules and applying them with compassion and wisdom.
Well, this deep dive into suckling has really opened my eyes. It's amazing how something as natural as breastfeeding can be connected to such complex legal, social, and even spiritual ideas.
It really does highlight how all these different parts of life in Islam are connected. And it's a good reminder that even the most ordinary things can have a really deep meaning.
It makes me wonder what else we'll discover as we continue to explore these Islamic texts. There's always something new to learn.
That's true. There's a lifetime of knowledge and wisdom waiting to be discovered.
This deep dive into Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2, has been incredible. We've talked about charity, fasting, rituals. It's all about how to live a meaningful life, guided by faith and compassion.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you. What makes these teachings so beautiful is that they offer guidance for every aspect of our lives, reminding us to connect with the divine and to treat each other with kindness.
I feel like I'm leaving this deep dive with a renewed sense of wonder and inspiration. I can't wait to continue exploring these teachings and finding ways to apply them to my own life.
May your journey of learning and reflection continue to brighten your path.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Echoes of Ihsan. Until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you.
It's interesting, isn't it, how these rules about suckling, they come from so long ago, but they still give us such a good understanding of how Islamic law works. It tries to balance what individuals need with what's best for the whole society.
Yeah, definitely. It really makes you appreciate how deep and complex Islamic teachings really are. It's not just about rules. It's about understanding people and making sure there's justice and compassion in every situation.
Exactly. And speaking of justice and compassion, that reminds me of another really important topic that's discussed in Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2, zakat.
Oh yeah, zakat. That's one of the 5 pillars of Islam, right? People often call it charity, but I bet it's more than just giving money to people in need.
You're right, it is. Zakat is so much more than just giving money to charity. It's a fundamental part of Islamic faith. It's a pillar, and it's really the foundation for economic and social justice in Islam. It's all about purifying yourself spiritually, being responsible for your community, and making sure things are balanced economically.
So it's not just about the act of giving. It's about the effect it has on everyone, both the people who give and the people who receive.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that when people keep getting wealthier and wealthier, it can create a lot of problems and inequality. Zakat is there to make sure that wealth keeps circulating and benefiting everyone, not just the wealthy.
That's a really powerful concept. It changes the way we think about charity. It's not just a good deed, it's actually a whole system to make sure everyone's taken care of.
Right. And it's not just a vague idea either. Zakat has a very clear structure. You have to calculate a certain percentage, 2.5% of all the wealth you have above a certain amount. That amount's called the nisab. And this wealth, it's not just money in your bank account. It includes your savings, gold, silver, any assets you have from your business, and even things like crops if you're a farmer.
Wow, so it's about all your wealth, not just what you earn. And it includes so many different things, not just cash. It's really comprehensive.
It is. It recognizes that wealth can come in many forms. And your obligation to share goes beyond just what you earn. It's about acknowledging how blessed you are to have wealth and then sharing those blessings so that everyone in the community benefits.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like a system built right into Islam to make sure wealth is spread around and everyone's taken care of.
That's one way to put it. And Sunan al Tirmidhi actually has several hadiths that give us a lot of insight into how zakat works and the best way to practice it.
Oh, cool. I always love hearing those real-life examples and stories. It makes these concepts so much easier to understand.
Me too. And there are some really beautiful stories about zakat. For example, Hadith 669 tells the story of a man who asked the Prophet if giving charity could benefit his mother even though she had already passed away.
It's amazing to think that even back then, people were thinking about how to help those who are no longer with us. What did the Prophet say?
He said, yes. Isn't that amazing? Even after someone dies, we can still help them by giving charity. It just shows us that doing good deeds is so powerful. And it connects our lives to the afterlife, showing that we're all still connected in Islam.
Yeah, it's really comforting to know that even though our loved ones are gone, we can still do things that will benefit them. It's a really beautiful concept. What other insights about zakat can we find in Sunan al Tirmidhi?
Well, there's another hadith, number 676, that talks about a specific type of charity called sadaqatul fitr. This one is given at the end of Ramadan, and it's an obligation for every Muslim, no matter what their social status is. Free, enslaved, male, female, everyone has to give it.
Oh, wow. So it's a way for everyone to participate no matter what their circumstances are.
Exactly. It's seen as a way of purifying your fasting during Ramadan. It's supposed to help even the poorest people in the community so they can celebrate Eid al-Fitr without struggling and enjoy the holiday along with everyone else. It just shows us how important community is in Islam. Even in acts of worship, you have to be thinking about your responsibility to everyone around you.
It's really beautiful how these practices bring everyone together. It's like we all chip in to make sure everyone can enjoy the celebration together.
That's exactly it. It creates this spirit of generosity and connection, showing everyone that their actions affect other people. And it reminds us that the well-being of the whole community is what really matters.
It's really inspiring. It makes you think about how we can bring these same principles into our own communities today.
It does. It makes you want to find ways to promote social justice and make sure everyone has a chance to prosper.
So far, the hadiths we've talked about show the really positive sides of zakat, like giving, helping those who've passed away, and bringing people together. Are there any cautionary tales about zakat in Sunan al Tirmidhi? Are there any warnings?
Actually, there are. Hadith 653 is a stark reminder that zakat is about helping people who are truly in need. It's about giving from your heart, not trying to benefit yourself or take advantage of the system. This hadith warns against begging for money just to increase your own wealth. And it describes some pretty serious punishments on the Day of Judgment for those who do that.
It's a good reality check, isn't it? Even when we're doing something good like giving to charity, we have to check our intentions and make sure we're doing it for the right reasons.
Absolutely. It's about being sincere in everything we do, especially when it comes to things like worship and charity. We should always examine our own motives and make sure our actions match what Islam teaches us.
It's easy to get caught up in doing the right thing, but we can get off track if our hearts aren't in the right place. It's a good reminder to always reflect on ourselves and make sure our actions are coming from true compassion and not from selfishness.
You got it. And that idea of having pure intentions, it doesn't just apply to giving. It's at the very core of the concept of zakat, which Hadith 664 explains really well. This hadith says that Allah will only accept charity that comes from pure sources, from what is called tayyib.
Wait, so even if someone earns their money honestly, their charity might not be accepted if their heart's not in the right place. That seems really hard to do.
It does, but it's emphasizing that all parts of a Muslim's life are connected. How you earn your money is just as important as how you spend it. If your wealth comes from dishonest sources, then it's considered tainted. And when you give that money to charity, it loses its spiritual value.
Wow, so it's not just about checking off boxes and fulfilling your obligations. You have to live your whole life according to Islamic principles. The way you earn money, the way you spend it, everything has to be sincere and ethical.
That's exactly right. Zakat is not just about moving money around. It shows how dedicated a Muslim is to living a righteous life. a life based on honesty, compassion, and caring for others. It's about striving to earn wealth in a halal way and then using that wealth in a way that benefits both yourself and the community, a way that pleases Allah.
This makes me think about the whole concept of halal. It's not just about the food we eat, right? It's about making sure every single part of our lives lines up with Islamic principles.
Exactly. Our faith impacts every single part of our existence. Living a halal life means making sure your actions, intentions, and even how you get your wealth are all in line with Islam.
It's like a beautiful tapestry. Every thread represents a different part of our life, and if they're all woven together with sincerity and good intention, it creates this amazing picture of what it means to live an Islamic life.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Zakat is a crucial thread in that tapestry. It's all about earning money ethically, giving sincerely, and making life better for everyone.
This deep dive into zakat has been amazing. It's given me a whole new understanding of what it means to give and how much it connects to every other part of Islamic life.
I've really enjoyed exploring this with you. Zakat is a truly fascinating subject. Are you ready for a change of pace? What's next on our journey through Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2?
Well, we've been talking about money and finances. Now let's shift to something a lot more personal and maybe even more challenging, the practice of fasting.
Yes, fasting, especially during Ramadan, is another pillar of Islam. And it has so many benefits, from growing spiritually and developing self-discipline to increasing your empathy and compassion for people who are struggling.
And I bet Sunan al Tirmidhi gives us some amazing insights into how and why we practice this important part of Islam.
You bet it does. It goes into all the details of fasting, explaining things, and giving examples from the Prophet Muhammad's life, peace be upon him.
So where should we start exploring this essential pillar of Islam?
Let's begin with a simple but profound hadith. Hadith number 694 suggests a way to break your fast. It recommends breaking the fast with dates. This highlights how the Prophet preferred simple and healthy foods.
That's interesting. It seems like such a small thing, but it's so meaningful. It suggests that we should be mindful and intentional even when we're just breaking a fast.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even during our religious practices, we can find beauty in simplicity and moderation. Dates are nutritious, easy to find, and gentle on your stomach, so they're a great way to ease your body back into eating after a day of fasting.
And think about the historical context, too. Back then, food wasn't always easy to come by. Choosing dates over fancy or luxurious foods showed a spirit of humility and gratitude.
You're so right. It's a lesson in appreciating what we have, even as we break our fasts. It's about not taking those blessings for granted.
It reminds me that fasting isn't just about not eating or drinking. It's about becoming more aware of our relationship with Allah, ourselves, and all the blessings we have.
I love that. It's about shifting our focus away from worldly desires and focusing on our spiritual journey. It's about being thankful for the simple things that sustain us.
I'm curious about how Sunan al Tirmidhi addresses those who can't fast, like people who are traveling or sick.
That's a great question. Islam is a religion of understanding and compassion. It knows that not everyone can or should fast all the time. Hadiths 7:12 and 7:13 specifically say that it's okay to break your fast if you're traveling. They recognize that everyone's situation is different.
So there's some flexibility within fasting. It accommodates those who would really struggle or even harm themselves by fasting.
Precisely. It shows that each person's well-being is the top priority, and Islamic rulings are supposed to be practical and considerate of real-life situations.
I love how Islam is all about easing burdens, not creating more. It's built on flexibility and compassion.
I completely agree. It reminds us that we shouldn't judge people based on whether or not they're fasting. Everyone's situation is unique, and only Allah truly knows what each person is capable of.
And speaking of judging others, there's a really funny story in Hadith 707. It's about the Prophet drinking water during the day while some of his companions were still fasting. It caused a lot of confusion and shows that even in fasting, there's a certain, let's call it flexibility.
It's such a great story. The Prophet's actions teach us a really important lesson. Don't be too rigid or judgmental about how other people practice their faith. Sometimes we might think that our way is the only right way, but this hadith reminds us that there might be good reasons why someone isn't fasting, reasons that are between them and Allah.
It's a good reminder to mind our own business and focus on our own relationship with our faith, rather than worrying about what other people are doing.
Exactly. Everyone has their own unique journey in faith, and judging people based on what we see can lead to misunderstandings and unnecessary conflict.
That's such an important message, especially today when it's so easy to get caught up in judging people based on their religious practices. This hadith reminds us to treat everyone with compassion and understanding because we're all on our own paths.
Beautifully said. And, fasting isn't always easy. We all slip up sometimes. We all make mistakes. Sunan al Tirmidhi even acknowledges this human side of our faith.
Really. What kind of mistakes are we talking about here?
Well, Hadith 721 talks about what happens when you accidentally eat or drink something while you're fasting. It explains that if you do something unintentionally, it doesn't invalidate your fast. It's like Allah is giving us a little bit of grace.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
So if we mess up, it's not the end of the world. It's just part of being human, and Allah understands that.
It does. It takes away that worry of accidentally breaking your fast and emphasizes the importance of sincere intentions in worship. Fasting isn't about being perfect. It's about trying your best and acknowledging that you're not always going to get it right.
So it's not about beating yourself up over small mistakes. It's about recognizing those mistakes, learning from them, and continuing to strengthen your relationship with Allah through fasting.
Exactly. It's about embracing the ups and downs of your faith journey and knowing that Allah's mercy covers our imperfections.
It reminds us that our faith is not about being perfect. It's about constantly striving, learning, and drawing closer to Allah.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's that constant effort to grow and become closer to Allah that defines what it means to live an Islamic life. And fasting, with all its challenges and rewards, is a perfect way to express this.
This conversation has really opened my eyes to how much depth and complexity there is in Islamic teachings, even the ones that seem straightforward. It's not just about following the rules. It's about understanding the deeper meaning behind those rules and applying them with compassion and wisdom.
Absolutely. Islamic teachings are meant to guide us toward a life of meaning and purpose. They help us grow closer to Allah and become better individuals and community members.
And it's so inspiring to see that these teachings, even though they're centuries old, are still so relevant today. They help us navigate all the complexities of modern life.
I agree. They offer wisdom that never gets old, no matter where or when you live. It's a framework to help you face life's challenges and find meaning in everything you do.
Speaking of the challenges of life, there's one more thing about fasting I want to talk about before we move on. Hadith 782 says that a woman shouldn't fast voluntarily, like outside of Ramadan, without asking her husband's permission. This shows us how important it is to consider your spouse's feelings, even in our religious practices.
That's a really good point. It shows how interconnected everything is in Islam. Even something as personal as fasting can affect your marriage and your family life.
Why do you think there's this rule about asking your husband's permission to fast voluntarily? What's the reasoning behind it?
Well, this hadith emphasizes how important it is to have mutual respect and consideration in a marriage. It acknowledges that a wife's decision to fast can have an impact on her husband, especially if it means they can't be intimate or if she can't do all her usual duties around the house. Getting the husband's permission ensures that the couple is communicating openly, prevents potential conflicts, and creates an atmosphere of cooperation and understanding in their relationship.
It's interesting how this hadith highlights that delicate balance between being devout and fulfilling your responsibilities within a marriage.
It does. It reminds us that our actions, even when they're motivated by religious devotion, can have an impact on others, especially our spouses. Open communication and being considerate of their needs are essential for a happy and fulfilling marriage.
It's a great reminder that Islam takes a holistic view of life. It blends our spiritual pursuits with our responsibilities to our families and our communities, and it encourages us to treat everyone with respect, compassion, and understanding.
Beautifully said. It's a reminder that Islam is not just about specific rituals or practices. It's about how we live our entire lives. It guides us towards a life of balance, purpose, and connection.
Well, this exploration of fasting has been a fantastic journey. We've talked about its spiritual importance, its flexibility, and even how it acknowledges our imperfections. There's so much wisdom and practical guidance to be found in these teachings.
It's been a joy sharing these insights with you. Fasting is such an incredible experience. But our journey through Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2, continues. What's next on our path of discovery?
We've talked about the personal and spiritual practice of fasting. Now let's move to a communal experience that unites Muslims from all over the world.
The Hajj.
Ah, yes. The Hajj is a pilgrimage to the heart of Islam. It's a journey that crosses all physical borders, uniting Muslims in a shared experience of devotion, submission to Allah, and spiritual purification.
It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam, a once-in-a-lifetime obligation for every Muslim who is able to do it. I'm really excited to learn more about this incredible experience and what Sunan al Tirmidhi has to say about this central part of Islamic faith.
Me too. The Hajj is filled with symbolism, rituals, and deep spiritual significance. It's a journey that changes the people who undertake it.
Let's take this virtual pilgrimage together. With Sunan al Tirmidhi as our guide, I'm sure we'll uncover many treasures.
I'm ready to embark on this journey with you. Let's dive into the complexities of Hajj and see what we can learn. So, where do we begin this epic journey?
Well, let's start with the basics. The Hajj is a pilgrimage to Makkah, the holiest city in Islam. It involves a series of rituals that are performed over several days. These rituals, they've been performed for centuries, and they're full of symbolism. They trace the footsteps of Prophet Abraham and his family and represent submission to Allah and a deep desire for spiritual cleansing.
It's incredible how these rituals have connected Muslims across time and space for so long. They create a sense of unity and shared heritage that goes beyond any physical borders.
You're right, it is truly remarkable. And Sunan al Tirmidhi offers so many insights into all the different aspects of Hajj. It explains everything from the different types of pilgrimages to the specific rituals and their meanings.
Speaking of different types of pilgrimages, Hadith 821 talks about a kind of Hajj called Tamatu. What makes this one different?
Tamatus is one of the 3 types of Hajj, and a lot of pilgrims find it the most convenient. It means performing Umrah first, which is a shorter pilgrimage that you can do any time of year. Then you perform Hajj during the same trip.
Oh, so you're basically doing 2 pilgrimages in one. Why do people perform Umrah before Hajj during Tamatu?
It's mainly about making things easier for the pilgrims. It allows them to enter the state of Ihram, which is the sacred state you have to be in for pilgrimage. They do this for Umrah, complete those rituals, and then they exit Ihram before re-entering it again for Hajj. It gives them a break to rest and prepare for the harder parts of Hajj.
It's fascinating how Islam offers different options to fit everyone's needs and circumstances.
It really does. It shows how practical and considerate Islamic teachings are. The goal is to make pilgrimage possible for as many people as possible. Make it something they can actually do, but without diminishing how sacred and spiritually important the journey is.
Really remarkable. I'm curious to hear more about the rituals of Hajj and the symbolism behind them.
There's so much to talk about. Each ritual has a deep meaning and reminds us of the challenges and victories of Prophet Abraham and his family. We have the Tawaf, where you circle the Kaaba, and the Sa'i, where you run between the hills of Safa and Marwa. Everything is so symbolic.
I can only imagine how powerful it must be to perform these actions in that specific place, connecting you to your shared history and faith.
Exactly. Sunan al Tirmidhi really captures the essence of that spiritual experience. It has such vivid descriptions and deep insights into the meaning behind these rituals.
I'm especially interested in Hadith 828. It talks about the talbiyah, which is a prayer you say during Hajj. The Hadith says that it's so powerful that even the rocks and trees echo it. That's such a strong image. It shows how spiritually powerful this pilgrimage is.
The talbiyah is a statement of your intention, a promise to submit to Allah's will. And it's a constant reminder to the pilgrims of why they're there during Hajj. The idea that even rocks and trees echo this prayer emphasizes that the Hajj experience affects everything, even the natural world.
It sounds like the entire atmosphere is charged with spiritual energy during Hajj. Everyone must be so much more aware and devout.
That's a great way to put it. And that heightened spiritual awareness is made even stronger by the restrictions placed on the mu'im. That's the name for the person who is in the state of Ihram for Hajj.
Yeah, I've read about those restrictions. Hadith 833 talks about what clothes you can't wear, right?
Exactly. When you're in Ihram, you have to wear simple, unstitched white garments. This symbolizes equality, humility, and letting go of all the distractions of the material world. The restrictions on clothing, jewelry, and certain actions during Ihram are all about creating a sense of unity and focusing on your inner state of devotion.
It's like everyone's stripping away their outward differences and standing before Allah as equals, focusing only on their spiritual journey.
You got it. It reminds us that in the eyes of Allah, it's not our worldly possessions or status that matter, but what's truly in our hearts.
What a powerful message. It reminds us that everyone is equal and to focus on our inner selves rather than what's on the outside.
Absolutely. And remember that practicality and consideration for individual circumstances we saw in the teachings on fasting, well, that shows up in the context of Hajj, too.
Oh, really? I'm curious to see how that plays out in a pilgrimage as demanding as Hajj.
There's a really interesting story in Hadith 847. It tells us that the Prophet allowed his companions to eat a wild donkey that had been hunted by one of their companions who wasn't in the state of Ihram.
Hold on, I thought hunting wasn't allowed during Hajj.
It wasn't, and it still isn't for those who are in Ihram. But the Prophet put the needs of his companions first, showing that even during these strict rituals, there's room for compassion and understanding. This hadith shows how flexible and practical Islamic law can be. It can adapt to unexpected situations to make sure people are taken care of.
It's a great example of how Islamic teachings aren't meant to be rigid or inflexible. They're designed to guide us towards a balanced life, full of compassion and practicality.
You got it. It's about understanding the spirit of the law and knowing when to bend the rules a little, especially when someone's well-being is at stake.
This look into the Hajj has been so insightful. It's incredible to see how this journey, with its elaborate rituals and deep symbolism, captures the very essence of what it means to be a Muslim.
It really is an awe-inspiring experience, both for those who physically go on the journey and for those who experience it through stories and teachings.
It makes me want to experience Hajj for myself one day. I can only imagine how powerful it must be.
I hope you get that chance someday. But for now, let's continue our journey through Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2, and see what other gems we can uncover.
We've explored these lofty spiritual aspirations of Hajj. Now let's turn our attention to a reality we all must face: death.
In Islam, death isn't the end. It's a transition, a passing from this world to the next. And Sunan al Tirmidhi approaches this topic with sensitivity and profound insights.
I'm really interested to learn how Islam prepares us for this inevitable transition. And what about the rituals associated with death and burial? What are those like?
Sunan al Tirmidhi explains Islamic burial practices in detail. The focus is on treating the deceased with the utmost respect, burying them quickly, and preparing their soul for the journey to the afterlife. These practices go beyond just ritual. They show us that life is sacred, even after death, and how important it is to honor the deceased as they make their final journey.
Hadith 993 really stood out to me. It emphasizes the sacredness of these rituals by stating that the people who wash the deceased should perform ghusl, the full-body ritual purification.
You're right. Ghusl, in this instance, is not just about physically cleaning the body. It's a spiritual purification as well. It's a sign of reverence for the deceased and preparation for their meeting with Allah. It's a final act of kindness and respect for the person who has passed.
It's amazing how such a simple act can carry so much symbolic weight. It's not just about hygiene. It's about acknowledging the sanctity of life and preparing for the transition to the afterlife.
Exactly. Even in death, we show honor and respect, taking the utmost care in preparing the deceased for their journey.
Sunan al Tirmidhi also talks about the emotions that come with death, especially grief.
It does. Hadiths 1003 and 1004 discuss this very sensitive topic. They make it clear that grieving is a natural human response to loss, but they caution against wailing or doing anything that might distress the deceased.
So it's about finding that balance between expressing your sadness and maintaining your composure out of respect for the deceased.
Exactly. These hadiths emphasize that grief should be expressed with dignity, avoiding anything that could be seen as excessive or disrespectful to the person who has passed away. It's about honoring their memory while also accepting Allah's will.
It's interesting how, even when we're experiencing such raw emotions, Islam encourages us to find a sense of balance and decorum. It recognizes that while it's natural to grieve, it's important to do it in a way that honors both the deceased and our faith.
It's about channeling that grief into acceptance, prayer, and good deeds. These things benefit both the deceased and ourselves. It reminds us that even in death, our actions and intentions matter, and that we can continue to honor our loved ones through how we conduct ourselves and through our prayers.
That's comforting to hear. It means that our connection to our loved ones doesn't end when they pass away, and we can still do things to help them.
Precisely. It's about understanding that there's a connection between this life and the afterlife, and that our actions in this world can affect those who have passed on.
Speaking of the afterlife, does Sunan al Tirmidhi tell us anything about the Islamic understanding of what happens to us after we die?
Yes, it does. Hadiths 1073 and 1074 paint a very clear picture of what happens to the soul after death. They emphasize the importance of good deeds and truly believing in Allah to achieve a peaceful afterlife.
It's a powerful message that encourages us to live our lives according to our faith and values, knowing that our actions here have consequences in the hereafter.
Absolutely. These hadiths are like a reminder to live a righteous life, striving to please Allah and do good deeds that will benefit us in this life and the next.
It's like a constant call to reflect on ourselves and make choices that will lead to a life of purpose and meaning.
You got it. It's about knowing that this life is just preparation for the next, and that everything we do here will shape our eternal destiny.
Exploring these Islamic teachings on death and the afterlife has been so thought-provoking. It makes you think about your own life and the legacy you want to leave behind.
It's a journey we all have to take eventually, and Sunan al Tirmidhi guides us through it with grace and profound wisdom.
Well, we've been talking about the seriousness of death. Now, let's transition to a topic that's full of joy, anticipation, and maybe even a little bit of awkwardness. Marriage.
Yeah, marriage.
Huh.
It's a sacred bond completing half of our faith. It's a path towards tranquility, companionship, and spiritual growth. It's a personal and universal experience, shaping individuals and families and affecting the very fabric of our society.
And I'm sure Sunan al Tirmidhi has a lot to say about the Islamic perspective on marriage. I bet it guides us through all the twists and turns and shines a light on the beauty and wisdom of this sacred union.
Absolutely. From the celebrations that mark the beginning of a marriage to the rights and responsibilities that keep it strong, Sunan al Tirmidhi offers so much wisdom and practical advice for couples starting this journey.
I can't wait to delve into these teachings and discover how they can guide us toward a fulfilling and meaningful marriage, grounded in Islamic principles.
Me neither. Let's discover the treasures of knowledge and insight that Sunan al Tirmidhi offers on this sacred union.
So, where should we begin our exploration of marriage through the teachings of Sunan al Tirmidhi?
Let's start with the celebration that kicks off a marriage, the wedding. Hadith 1088 paints a really lively picture of Islamic weddings. It says that one of the things that sets a lawful marriage apart from an unlawful one is the presence of music and celebration.
That's an interesting distinction. It seems like Islam really values joy and public declarations at weddings. Marriage isn't supposed to be some secretive, somber event.
Exactly. This hadith tells us that marriage is a reason to celebrate. It's a public declaration of commitment, a time for families and communities to come together and share in the happiness of this new union. Music and celebrations are expressions of that joy, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the lives of the couple and their families.
I love how this hadith captures that feeling of joy and togetherness that surrounds Islamic weddings. It's not just a private contract between two people. It's a celebration of love, commitment, and two families becoming one.
Beautifully put, it reminds us that marriage is an important part of society, a fundamental building block, and an occasion for everyone to share in the happiness.
So while celebrating is an important part of an Islamic wedding, it sounds like it's equally important to make sure the marriage is done in a lawful and proper way.
Absolutely. Sunan al-Tirmidhi stresses how important it is to meet certain conditions to make sure a marriage is valid and sacred.
For example, Hadiths 1106 and 1107 talk about the role of the wali, or guardian, in a woman's marriage. It's really interesting how much emphasis Islam places on the family's involvement and consent in this process.
You're right. The wali, who is usually a close male relative like the father or brother, is there to protect the woman's interests. He makes sure she's entering the marriage with her family support and blessings. This highlights how important family is in Islam. They're supposed to guide and support individuals when they make big life decisions like getting married.
It sounds like a safety net, making sure the woman isn't going into marriage alone, but with the guidance and support of those who care about her.
Exactly. Marriage is a huge step in life, and having the guidance and blessings of your family strengthens the marriage and gives both the bride and groom a feeling of support and security.
So while there's definitely a focus on the legal and social aspects of marriage, it sounds like Sunan al-Tirmidhi also makes sure to emphasize the importance of companionship and joy within the marriage.
You are absolutely right. Hadith 1100 is a fun but profound reminder that marriage is not just about fulfilling your duties. It's about enjoying each other's company, finding happiness together, and building a life full of love and laughter.
I love that. Tell me more about this hadith.
This hadith tells a really cute story. The Prophet encourages a man named Jabir to marry a young girl so they can play together. At first, it might sound like a weird suggestion, but it really highlights how important it is to be compatible with your spouse, to share interests, and to find joy in your marriage.
It's a good reminder that marriage isn't just a serious contract. It's about building a life with someone you enjoy being around, someone who brings you joy, someone you can learn and grow with.
That's it. A successful marriage is about mutual affection, shared experiences, and making each other happy.
So while it's important to fulfill your duties in a marriage, it's equally important to nurture that emotional connection and create a partnership that's truly joyful and fulfilling.
Exactly. It's realizing that marriage has many sides. It's about responsibilities, but also about cultivating love and joy in your relationship.
And speaking of responsibilities, Sunan al-Tirmidhi doesn't shy away from those either. It talks about the rights and obligations that come with marriage, making it clear that balance, fairness, and mutual respect are super important in this sacred bond.
Right. Hadiths 1141 and 1163 address the rights and responsibilities of both husbands and wives, emphasizing that justice and mutual respect are key. They stress how important balance and fairness are in a marriage.
It's so interesting how these hadiths highlight the importance of equality and fairness in a marriage. It's not just about fulfilling your roles, it's about respecting each other's rights and building a partnership based on understanding and mutual respect.
Exactly. Both husbands and wives have rights and responsibilities. Fulfilling those obligations is key to a happy and fulfilling relationship. Islam teaches that a husband should treat his wives with kindness, fairness, and understanding. In turn, wives should respect their husbands and fulfill their duties within the marriage.
It sounds like a reminder that marriage is a two-way street, a true partnership where each person contributes to the well-being and happiness of the other.
You said it. A successful marriage is built on mutual respect, sharing responsibilities, and genuinely wanting to contribute to each other's happiness.
Exploring marriage through the teachings of Sunan al Tirmidhi has been amazing. It's incredible how these teachings offer guidance for every stage of married life, from those joyful celebrations at the beginning to the responsibilities and dynamics that keep a marriage strong and harmonious.
It's been wonderful exploring this with you. Marriage is a fundamental human experience, and Sunan al Tirmidhi provides a wealth of wisdom and practical guidance for navigating marriage within the principles of Islam.
Well, we've talked about navigating a lot of different aspects of life. Now let's move on to our final topic in this deep dive into Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2, Suckling.
Suckling. It's a topic that often sparks curiosity, especially when discussed within the context of religious teachings.
I have to admit, I was a little surprised to find it included in this collection of hadiths. It's not something you usually hear about in discussions about Islam.
You're right, it might seem unusual to some, but actually, suckling is really important in Islamic law and social structures. It deals with the impact of breastfeeding, especially during those early years of a child's life, and how it shapes relationships and defines what interactions are allowed according to Islam.
So it's more than just the biological act of breastfeeding. It's about the social and legal consequences that come from it.
Exactly. In Islamic law, suckling creates a very specific kind of foster relationship. It's considered just as important as a blood tie. It's fascinating how something as natural as breastfeeding can have such a big impact on individuals, families, and even the whole community.
I'm realizing there's so much more to Islam than I thought. It's not just about rituals and beliefs, it's a whole system that addresses every part of human experience, even the everyday things, and provides ethical and spiritual guidance.
You got it. Islam is a holistic way of life, offering guidance for everything we do, from our private lives to our interactions in society. And the concept of suckling, although not talked about as much as other topics, is a perfect example of this holistic approach.
I'm really interested to learn more. Let's get into the details and see what Sunan al Tirmidhi tells us about this fascinating concept.
Okay, let's start with the most basic idea, that suckling creates a unique bond, a foster relationship that's really important in Islamic law. Hadith 1147 sums it up beautifully, saying that anything Allah has forbidden through blood relationships, He has also forbidden through suckling.
Wow, that's powerful. So you're saying that the same rules that apply to siblings and parents also apply to people connected through suckling. The prohibitions about marriage, inheritance, even physical contact.
That's right. The same rules that apply to blood relatives apply to those linked by suckling. It really emphasizes how crucial breastfeeding is in Islamic tradition. It shapes social structures, determines who you can interact with, and even affects family relationships beyond bloodlines.
It's a lot to take in. It means that one act of breastfeeding can create lifelong relationships that have the same weight as blood ties. That's a huge impact on society and the law.
It is, and it shows how carefully Islamic law handles these matters. It understands that relationships can develop in different ways and recognizes the significance of the bonds created through suckling. These bonds are important and deserve to be acknowledged and respected according to Islamic teachings.
So this isn't just some abstract concept. It has real consequences for people's lives.
Absolutely. It determines who you can marry, inherit from, even who you can be alone with. These guidelines help to prevent people from unintentionally breaking Islamic law and provide a framework for keeping those boundaries clear, even across generations.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about setting clear boundaries and providing a way to navigate those boundaries within the framework of Islamic teachings. but I must admit it's way more complicated than I initially thought.
It is complex, but it shows how sophisticated and deep Islamic law is. It's designed to address the complexities of relationships and how society works.
So how does Sunan al Tirmidhi guide us through this complex world of suckling? Are there any specific guidelines or examples to help us understand how this concept is applied in real life?
Yes, definitely. The text provides specific rulings and explores different situations, offering insight into how these principles are applied in everyday life. For instance, Hadith 1152 makes a really important point. It says that this prohibition based on suckling only counts if it occurred before the child turned 2.
Interesting. Why is there a specific age cutoff?
Scholars believe that for suckling to create that special foster relationship, it has to have a real lasting impact on the child's development. After age 2, breastfeeding is more about comfort and extra nutrition. It doesn't have the same impact on forming that kind of foster relationship, so the rules don't apply in the same way.
So it's all about that critical period of development in those first 2 years. Amazing how even the smallest details can have huge consequences, both legally and socially.
It's about making sure things are clear and fair within the community. These guidelines help Muslims navigate potentially tricky situations and prevent them from accidentally violating Islamic law. Imagine two families who aren't even aware of a past breastfeeding relationship between their children. These rules help to clarify the boundaries and make sure everyone stays within the bounds of what's permissible.
It's like a safeguard to make sure that even if information is missing or memories are fuzzy, there are clear guidelines in place to prevent unintended mistakes.
Exactly. It's all about providing a framework that protects individuals, families, and the community. It ensures that relationships and interactions follow the guidelines set by Islamic law.
It really makes you appreciate the wisdom and foresight of these teachings.
Yeah.
It's not just about setting random rules. It's about addressing real-life scenarios and offering practical guidance for navigating human relationships.
And in the midst of all these rules and regulations, it's really heartwarming to see those human touches too. Like in Hadith 1153, where it talks about the Prophet showing kindness to the woman who breastfed him as a child.
Oh, that's a lovely detail. Even with all the rules and prohibitions, it's clear that there's a deep sense of respect and gratitude for those who nurtured and cared for us.
You're right. It shows that these rules are not just cold and impersonal. They're meant to create a society where compassion is valued, especially for those who cared for us when we were young and vulnerable.
It reminds us that family in Islam isn't just about blood ties. It's about acknowledging and showing appreciation for everyone who played a role in our upbringing.
Beautifully said. It expands the definition of family, recognizing the profound impact that nurture and care can have in our lives.
But then we have Hadith 1148, which throws a bit of a curveball. It tells the story of the Prophet advising a man to not be alone with the woman he had suckled as a baby. Am I understanding this correctly?
You are. It might seem surprising, but this hadith underlines just how seriously Islam takes this foster relationship created by suckling. The same rules about closeness and interactions that apply to blood relatives also apply here, even if there's no biological connection.
So even if there's no blood relationship, the social and legal implications are just as serious. It really drives home the point that family in Islam isn't just about blood ties. It's about a complex network of relationships that affect how we act and our responsibilities to each other.
You've got it. It's
Fine.
about understanding that these bonds, whether through blood or acts like breastfeeding, are really important. We need to be careful and aware of how we navigate them.
So we've established that suckling creates this really strong foster relationship with a lot of implications. But what about situations that are even more complicated? What about the rulings for freed slaves?
That's where things get even more complex. Hadith 1154 addresses one specific situation, a freed slave woman who is married.
What does it say?
It actually has different rulings based on the status of the woman's husband. If the husband was also a slave, then when the woman was free, she was allowed to decide if she wanted to stay married to him or not. But if the husband was a free man, then she didn't get to choose.
That's an interesting distinction. Why are there different rulings?
It shows how much Islamic law considers power dynamics and people's individual circumstances. Back then, slavery was a common thing, so when a slave couple was freed, it completely changed their lives. Giving the woman the right to decide whether to stay or leave acknowledged that their relationship might be different because of their new freedom.
That makes sense. Their whole world was changing, so it was only right to give her the freedom to decide about her marriage. But why didn't she have a choice if her husband was already free?
In those cases, the husband already had a higher social standing. This ruling was probably meant to prevent the woman from feeling pressured or forced to stay in the marriage. Islamic law recognized the power difference in those situations and wanted to protect the woman.
So Islamic law is always trying to be fair and just, considering what's going on in the world and what's happening in people's lives.
You got it. Islamic rulings aren't just about strictly following rules, they're about trying to be just and equitable, considering the context of the situation and the world around us.
It makes you think twice about just reading a rule and blindly applying it. It all depends on the specific situation and the people involved.
Exactly. This highlights the importance of really learning and understanding Islamic law. It's not just about memorizing the rules, it's about understanding the big ideas behind them and applying them with compassion and wisdom.
Wow, this deep dive into suckling has been incredibly eye-opening. It's amazing how something as natural as breastfeeding can be connected to such complex, legal, social, and even spiritual ideas.
It shows how all the different parts of life are connected in Islam. It reminds us that even the most ordinary things can have deep meaning and significance.
It makes you wonder what other insights are waiting for us to discover as we continue exploring these texts. There's always something new to learn.
That's the beauty of it. Learning and understanding is a lifelong journey, and these texts provide so much wisdom and guidance for those who are seeking to deepen their understanding of Islam.
This deep dive into Sunan al Tirmidhi, Volume 2, has been truly incredible. We've explored Islamic practices and traditions, gaining a deeper understanding of charity, fasting, rituals, and ultimately how to live a meaningful life filled with faith and compassion.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you. These teachings are beautiful because they offer guidance for all aspects of our lives, reminding us of our connection to the divine and to treat each other with kindness.
I'm leaving this deep dive feeling inspired and full of wonder. I can't wait to keep learning and applying these timeless teachings to my own life.
May your journey of learning and reflection continue to illuminate your path.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Sunan al Tirmidhi. Until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you.